what he said. It doesn't look like they're on a track.
They are. I see it moving now.
Hey, Dustin. Yo, is she coming to do a tour today on this? You read the schedule, you would know that at 1 o'clock.
Nobody gave you a schedule, Rob?
No, he drove to Chicago yesterday. We'll talk about that. Alright. So I'm going to project on my little crappy little whiteboard here just so you guys can see some stuff while we're on. See this?
Yeah, that light above it's not going to let it come through. Not for filming anyway.
I mean, that's tiny, but is that, I mean, it's, alright, it's what I got, so. Everything's recorded. Yeah, we're live. Yeah. You want both cameras on right? Which camera's on, so I know? That one. That one's on? Yeah. So you're walking around giving me, the audio's being recorded where? And the audio's right there. And then that's your start. That one will have background. Alright, so you're going to have that one come on and I'm about to start, so I have that one on in the front first. Okay, so are we just keeping it rolling? Yeah, I mean, just keep this one rolling, get this whole time. For those who couldn't make the event, I got to record it. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to do Planet Tank. You ready? I'm going to do Planet Tank 101. This is a very generic, high level, but I'm going to get real detailed on some of this stuff because we got 20 people here, and like, I got no problem getting gritty and dirty on it because it's like the most favorite topic on the planet. So let's see here. What we're going to cover first. Scroll here. I'm going to talk about all this stuff, tank sizes, types of tank stands, substrate, filtration. I'm going to do, I'm not really going to hit on fish. I am going to hit on plants, but I'm going to do plants in an entirely separate talk. I got an entire bag, or entire box of goodies underneath here that were just straight greenhouse graft this morning that if I don't keep putting water on, they're going to wither, but actually I'm going to have Josh put those up in the tank. So yeah, but I want to start with tank sizes. This story starts real simply with my 220. How big of a tank can you afford? What size tank to get? So I got one of the best fish tank stories ever. It was like 2006. I just moved to Lexington. My only friends were in at the pet shop. One of my dudes, Brian, you've seen the videos. And my other buddy, Parker, was there. Anybody ever been to Just Fish when it was alive? No? That's crazy. Right by my house. Total poison. And my buddy, I go in there all the time. I got a 125 set up at the time. My boy walks in there. He's like, hey man, I got something to back show you. Real hippie dude. I'm like, oh. And I'm thinking he's got some bad fish. Like, this is going to cost me $50. Like, but I'm just used to that. Like, all right, it's cool. I got something cool. Guys going to show me. He goes, no, it's out back. I said, all right. He goes, come here. Shows me, he's like, it's a 220-gallon tank that I have set up. It's got a teal blue background. I'm like, all right, how much is it? So it's $500. Here, like how fast can you take my money? Like, right? Like, so it's $500 all day. Take it, right? I don't even have a place for this tank, right? This is not even, decision making is not good. This is just like impulse buy, I'm buying this tank. And I on the spot I bought that. It's relevant to this slide because that $500 was nothing, right? Like impulse buy, boom. But I did not have any filtration. I did not have any lighting. I immediately, in that same breath of fish tank adrenaline, bought $250 of metal halides, which was, I don't know, which they're badass lights, but like, they weren't in the 500, you know? Like this was, so I'm at 750 with no filter, so I still gotta do more there. And I think it's relevant because, you know, it's not just what the tank costs, right? I mean, Rob sold me tanks 50 cents a gallon, so I was like, hold up, I gotta get 440 breeders from him and 520 longs. No, really, that's exactly what I bought from him. Like, that's not a joke. And, but you gotta put stuff in them. So I just think when you guys come to that point where you're like, man, I need a 220, or man, I need a 265. I mean, Doc, you got a 265. That's just the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, you got to get in there. You filter a 265 is not a sponge filter. So I encourage you all to really take a big look at that when you're getting that tank. Now, there's a million ways to cheat and do stuff cheap and all that, but I mean, just know, like, look, as a marketing dude, like Petco $1 per gallon sale, fantastic. Like, how great of a sale is that? It's easy, it's simple, it's $1. 20 gallons is 20 bucks, but then you gotta buy everything, right? So, I mean, anybody here not been victim to the $1 per gallon sale? Like, everybody take advantage of that?
I think it's 20 gallons.
Oh, dude. You know, 100 gallons, there you go. So that's, I think that's important to consider. This is the third bullet on here though. What do you have room for? Strategically placed photo of the greenhouse. Top tank, full sun, full CO2. Can't get better, right? Nothing better. Like, my best tank. Tank above it, 75, full sun, nothing better. Tank bottom right, I keep shrimping, nothing better. The one with the logo over it's terrible. It sucks. It always sucks. It sucks right now. Like, it's half full of water. I had an African import, it got a bunch of bugs, it's shit. It's the fourth tank. Like, I can't, like, I get the water change, it doesn't get the water change. Like, it gets neglected. So, you know, when you have that, like most of you guys, everybody in here's got 2 tanks, right? Like, basically, all of you, which is hilarious, just in and of itself as our own little group, because 99.9% of the people in this world don't understand why you have to have 2. So, we're all in this together. But, so, you know, put that into your thought. Like, so I had, at one point in my basement, I had the 220, I had a 90, and I had 475s. They all kind of sucked, right? Like, there was some that was all right, but they weren't, like, great. And then I slowly got the 475s you see there out. So they became skank tanks. And then I had the 220, the 90, and then I brought the 90 out. And so now I got, like, a 220, and I got a Blue Ball B26. And that's it. And I'm really in a zone with that. So I just want to, like, everybody should have more than 1 tank, but I want to say proceed with caution when you get that, oh man, I gotta go get another tank kind of feel, because it might, you know, there's going to be more to it. Now that said, if you're just like, this is the Java Moss tank, I mean, get 20 of them, right? So, and then on tank sizes, I want to hit this pretty hard. On actual, so I've talked about like tank sizes, buying new stuff. I actually want to talk about raw tank sizes and gas exchange for a minute. My favorite footprint on the planet is a 75 gallon. Many reasons for that. The bigger the tank, the easier, the harder it is to screw it up, right? Which seems counterintuitive because you're like, Johnny goes and buys a 5 gallon because that's what he can afford, and then it's like, it's harder because you got to do, you know, if fish dies, you got a 5 gallons, domino of that, whatever. Like, think about, I'm gonna stay micro with you for a minute. We imported a bunch of shrimp. They were in a small container, but there was 100 of them. One of them dies, 2 of them die, 3 of them die, 4 of them die quickly. 275 of them die. That's a real number. And then because they're in a small confined area, you go bigger. You go 75. You go 100. I mean, how easy is 100 gallon? Anybody keeping 75s, 100s? You don't gotta do anything. Yeah, there's nothing. I mean, 100-gallon tank, it's big, you know, as long as it's not over, like, it's easy. So, I like that. I'm all about gas exchange. I don't have the slide on here, but there's definitely something to be said about shorter tanks. And I'm just talking gas exchange here. We're going to talk about lighting in a second. But gas exchange is paramount. I like to have, for an easy number, as tall, I hate ratios with fish tanks, but if you have like, I like to have my surface area length be like 3 times my height. So like if you got a 24-inch tall tank, yeah, I think 75 is cool, right? 20, what is 75? 18? 75 is 18? Yeah. Right, alright, so but then you got the 4-foot footprint on that, so that's close enough. But just a good gas exchange, because you want everything coming out. I'm going to talk about surface vegetation in a minute, but you want really good gas exchange. 20 longs, 40 breeders, for the planted tank that I'm doing. Now look, I love a 40 tall, but the gas exchange is harder to do. Any questions on your own tank sizes? Dustin, I've got this tank. You know, what do you recommend? Or any like or I can get access to this tank. What do you think about it? Anybody have any like, my friend's trying to give me a hexagon questions, or like, anybody got any just like raw tank size questions? Like, I'm trying to breed this, I want what size? Any questions at all on just the tank sizes? No? Good?
How about this? If somebody does have a smaller tank, like what's the best way to manage a small tank? I think it's hard with like if you only have a 5-gallon tank, you know, that sucks because things can go wrong quick. Is there a way to like really manage a 5-gallon tank?
I mean, the way is to just manage like you do other ones, the water changes or whatever. That's key.
10% every
water,
day.
Yeah. I want to introduce the best addition I've had in about a month. His name is Josh. Josh, what's up? Hello. And I'm going to immediately give him praise, and I'm going to immediately put him to work. Man. But dude, he doesn't like to work in my greenhouse is like just nuts. So he comes in, he does everything I ask him to do. My brother, can you just take those plants and slowly throw in that 20, just stand behind it, slide that around, and put them in there. And then if that tank gets too full, Rob's got a 20 high in his van. We'll put them in. We'll set up another 20 high next to that. Feel me? So you guys get the plant pouring while I'm talking. That'll be kind of fun. All right. So yeah. So the small tank, yeah. Go. Between the water changes, air stones, totally air stones. Oxygen exchange is huge. This next topic is going to take a while. Lighting your aquarium. Heroin. It's total heroin. Because when you figure out how to light your aquarium, there's other factors involved. Nutrition, so you can't look at it independently. We're going to get real narrow on this. And it's become an area to me where I wish when I was 18 years old and they said, you can take physics and probably get an F, or you can take, easy science and probably get a B or a C. I took the easy science. I wish I would have taken physics. I wish I would have studied more of it, because lighting is freaking awesome. Lighting is shit. Like, I'm going to rant for quite a long time on this, so if you want to take a break in the middle of it, that's fine. Okay, lighting your aquarium. Center of our solar system is the sun, right? Like, I don't even know how much bigger the sun is than our planets. You guys, basic science, right? The sun's huge, center of our system. Okay? We have to imitate that. Like these are photosynthetic creatures, right? And I would argue that the fish benefit from great lighting, maybe not as much as plants, but close to it. So I really recommend understanding at a full level. Lighting is super duper important. It's the one thing that everybody wants to cheap out. It's the one thing that everybody wants to, do cheap. But it's the one. It's something that if you get it right, you can grow anything. So there's some.
farming crops, outdoors. Aquaculture means with dealing aquatic animals. So typically that's fish farming, although it could be other aquatic animals as well. Which means it's going to get real close back to what so many of you all are here for today, of keeping aquariums. What do you guys have to do to maintain an aquarium that only has aquatic animals in it? Don't put any plants in it. Water changes, absolutely. So if you've ever kept an aquarium, even if it's something as simple as like the classroom aquarium when you were in 4th grade science, you know that in order to maintain the health of those animals, you've got to clean out their water. And you also have to feed them. They are animals, fish are animals, they need food. But the reason you have to clean out their water is because they're obviously putting their waste into that water. That is the challenge of doing aquatic livestock as opposed to land-based livestock. Our aquatic fish cannot get out of their tanks to use the bathroom. Therefore, they're using the bathroom in their own water environment, which means that's actually going to be toxic to them. And specifically, and I won't go too technically on the science, but specifically the concern is the ammonia. And we're getting too much ammonia from that fish waste, and that is ultimately going to poison those fish. When you're talking about a small tank, we've got a lot of bigger tanks here today, but like a 5-gallon, 10-gallon, maybe even up to a 50-gallon tank, it's not a huge deal to dump that dirty water and replace it with clean water. At our farm, we have 7,000 gallons of water in our system. That is a much bigger deal of dumping all of that fish poopy water on a regular basis, and also a big deal of replacing it then with clean water. We actually utilize city water here at Food Chain, and the reason we're able to do that is because we use so little of it. And so it would not be viable for us to do that, both from an economic standpoint as also from a water chemistry standpoint, to use city water if we were having to replace all of that 7,000 gallons of water. Plus, we know that there's not unlimited supplies of fresh water on our planet. It's not great to send a whole bunch of ammonia-rich water down the waste stream. And so there's a lot of reasons why we don't want to do that scenario, just specifically aquaculture. On the flip side is hydroponics. So hydroponics is actually pretty common in the state of Kentucky. It's oftentimes used as a season extension for crops getting started earlier in the year so that then they're ready to be transferred out once it's warm enough outside. And the meaning of hydroponics is that we're growing plants without using soil. So you can be far more versatile in where you're doing that. But the problem when you remove soil from the equation is you take away the plant's food. That's where those plants are getting their nutrition. And typically in a strictly hydroponic environment, when you remove that soil, you're going to replace that nutrition with fertilizer. Fertilizer is not only expensive, it is another case where we don't have unlimited resources for providing those nutrients. Most of those are coming out of fossil fuel sources. So a lot of concerns with trying to use artificial fertilizer. Hopefully, by the way I just described aquaculture and hydroponics, you're already starting to put it together in your head. Can you see how we might be able to combine these things for an advantage? Yeah, so by putting those two industries together, the waste from the fish actually serves as the input for the plants, and in return, the plants, as they take out that nutrition from the water, clean the water so it can be sent back to the fish. So aquaponics is not a new technique. It's been around for decades. Interestingly enough, it's been done largely in countries and communities where they have less access to fresh water and arable land, because they're used to thinking about having limited resources. And aquaponics is a fantastic way of farming with using a fraction of the inputs that you would otherwise have to use. Specifically from a water standpoint, we only need about 5% of the water to operate our farm compared to conventional methods. And that's because our water is cycling round and round and round. If you talk to a traditional outdoor in-ground farmer, they're going to talk about how their biggest investment in their farm is their soil. That's the longevity of their farm. They continue to replenish it and fertilize it, and it sustains long after crops do. For here in our aquaponics farm, the corollary to that is our water. So I mentioned that we got our farm started in 2013. Our water has been cycling round and round and round since then. So that is our resource. Our water is our greatest resource. The worst thing we could ever have to do in maintaining our farm would be to have to dump our water, because that's all of our investment over the last 4 years. So talking specifically about how, are there any questions about that? Sorry, I'll just get rolling.
You ever introduce new water into this?
We do. So it's not a completely watertight system. Obviously, because we're indoors, we have less evaporation to contend with than we would if we were outdoors, but we do still have some evaporation. As much as possible, we try to keep things covered, particularly where they're exposed to light, in order to minimize algae production, but we still have some evaporation. We have a dehumidifier that runs 24 hours a day, so it's like our little rain cloud in here that we dump right back into the system. So we capture some of that in there. But another big water loss for us is biomass. So our farm is focused around human food production. And we are not in the decorative production business. We are not trying to grow tulips or betta fish or what have you. So we are continually harvesting food out of the system, which means all of the water it's taken up in its cells as it's grown doesn't get recaptured. It goes into our stomachs as humans who eat it. So the biggest thing that we're replacing water for is through that biomass that we're losing through harvest. That's what this light water reservoir is over here. That's actually our city water. So we fill that city water, our reservoir up with city water. Our biggest challenge with the city water is twofold, actually. We're coming out of one of them, but we always have the concern of the chlorine that's in the water. Fish don't like chlorine. There's a couple of ways we combat that. The first thing is we don't add the water straight from the tank. We put it into that reservoir and aerate the heck out of it to bleed off as much of the chlorine as possible. The other advantages that we have is that we're really not adding very much. So given the fact that our whole system has 7,000 gallons of water, it's pretty diluted, any chlorine that might be left. But the other real important thing for us is the water temperature. So particularly in the wintertime, the water that comes out of that tap is cold. And we would shock our little tilapia if we just added it again straight from the tank. So the reason we have that reservoir is twofold. Number one, to get as much of the chlorine out before we add it in, but also to get it up to temperature so that it's not shocking our fish when we put it in. That's set up with an automatic float valve. So basically whenever the water level drops, it triggers pumping in some of that water from the reservoir. But it's a real small fraction considering the 7,000 gallons. We fill up that reservoir about every other week. Yeah.
So humidity, you only have this dehumidifier, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the humidity in here and how do you control molding?
So what does it say the humidity is? Probably 80, 75? 55? Oh, hey, well, look at that. I guess it hasn't rained in a while. It gets real humid in here, and moisture is a major challenge for us. The ceiling in this space is a real battle. We ended up having to totally repaint our ceiling about 1.5 years into our farm operations with a marine grade mold resistant paint, just to try to prevent mold from growing in here. It does help that it's a relatively big space, so there's a lot of room, and we do try to keep as much of the water covered as possible. The fish tanks we don't have covered because we need to interact with those fish, but we also don't have light over them, so there's less evaporation. Trying to maintain minimal evaporation over there. That's why most of our plant beds are covered, is because that's where our light is. Also from an algae standpoint, because we don't want algae in our environment because the tilapia eat algae and that gives them an off flavor. So, humidity is a challenge. There's no question about it. Given that this was the oven room, it didn't come with great ventilation. So we actually are always struggling around ventilation. And if water spills, if we have something that overflows, we've got fans that we blow, but the moisture content rapidly increases. When we mop in here, you can feel it instantaneously at the humidity, just because it's so warm.
So what are the fans mainly for?
So the fans are actually for just comfort. So these fans, specifically these two big fans, we had put in just from a comfort standpoint, and these are obviously big ass fans. It's a local company. They donated them. There's no way food chain could have afforded that. From an agricultural production, we actually had them add these two sweat bees, these yellow fans over there. When we first got started, one of the concerns we had, and there's a lot of research out there that we were building on from aquaponics standpoint, but not a lot of that research takes place indoors. There's a lot of outdoor aquaponics, specifically in warmer environments, where there's this just smaller body of indoor operations. And one of the concerns that we were worried about with our plant production was not having any resistance. So basically, without any kind of a wind, we were worried our plants were going to be weaklings, and therefore they were going to be more susceptible to any kind of infections or insects or other predators that might get in here. So for that standpoint is why we actually had those put in, just to give them a little resistance. What we found was our plants don't really struggle with that, and they're really loud. So when we have people in here, which as I've already said is the main thrust behind what Food Chain is doing, it was really a problem. So those actually haven't been turned on, I don't think, in a couple of years. Basically, we figured out that the plants didn't perform any better with them than without them, and so we just didn't bother turning them back on. Yeah.
How many iterations of you had in this particular room, or did you plan a specific model just like we see it today?
So we plant, yes and no. So this is the timeline. So Food Chain found out about this building in the summer of 2011 when it was being purchased by the owners of Wessex Brewery to put the brewery in. It's a 90,000 square foot building. The brewery did not need 90,000 square feet. They might actually, if they were asked today, have changed their idea or calculations of how much space they needed, but whatever, too late. Everything's already claimed. So Food Chain found out about the opportunity to have below market rent in this facility in return for us doing our own upgrades to the space. So like all the copper wire had been stripped out. There were no utilities in this bay when we first got it. So we had to pay for all of that. So that was one of the things that we were fundraising for. Not only all of the utility upgrades, but then also for the construction of our big farm. Nobody knew what the heck aquaponics was back in 2012, or very few people knew, and they certainly didn't understand what the benefit of having a big farm